The NFL's most terrifying defender, Myles Garrett does not just rush quarterback. He changes what an entire offense is willing to do before the ball is even snapped. One wrong protection call, one tackle left alone on an island, 1/2 second of hesitation, and Garrett can turn a normal passing play into pure chaos. That is why the most revealing moment in his story was not a stat, an award, or even a record. It was a desperate warning caught on a live microphone. Jordan, run. Think about what that really means. A professional NFL offensive lineman, trained and paid to protect his quarterback, realized in real time that Garrett had beaten him so cleanly that the only option left was to warn Jordan Love to escape. No technical adjustment, no second chance, just panic. And that panic is exactly what makes Garrett different. At 6'4" and around 272 pounds, Garrett already looks like the prototype for an elite edge rusher. But the numbers only tell part of the story. His speed off the snap, explosive first step, length, flexibility, and power create a combination that offensive tackles struggle to prepare for. He can win outside with speed, attack inside before a blocker can recover, or overwhelm protection with raw force, even when offenses know where he is lined up. Knowing does not always help. That is why quarterbacks build entire game plans around him. That is why teams send extra blockers. That is why double teams become routine. And according to the source material, even all of that was not enough to stop what came next. Garrett's 2025 season was described as the most dominant stretch of his career, highlighted by 23 sacks and another Defensive Player of the Year campaign, but the records are only one layer of the story. Joe Burrow spent years dealing with Garrett in the AFC North. Green Bay learned how quickly one matchup can collapse. The NFL still remembers the Mason Rudolph incident. Cleveland eventually faced a massive contract and trade saga, and later, the story shifted again toward Los Angeles and an even bigger Super Bowl conversation. The frightening part is that Garrett's story is not built around one moment, it is built around a pattern. Speed, power, pressure, controversy, resilience, ambition. And now, with everything he has already accomplished, Garrett still appears driven by the one thing individual dominance cannot guarantee: a championship. So before we break down exactly how a man this big became this explosive, tell us where you are watching from. If you believe Myles Garrett is the most terrifying pass rusher in football, comment un. If you think another defender deserves that title, comment too and tell us who. And subscribe to the channel for more NFL stories, rivalries, trades, and behind-the-scenes drama built like a defensive end, moves like something else. To understand why Myles Garrett creates so much fear, you have to start with the obvious. His body does not move the way a 272-pound body is supposed to move. At roughly 6'4", Garrett already has the size NFL teams look for in an elite edge defender. But what separates him from almost everyone else is how violently fast that size can accelerate. At the 2017 NFL Combine, Garrett ran the 4.0-yard dash in 4.64 seconds, posted a 4.1-inch vertical jump, and recorded a 10'8" broad jump. Those numbers would be impressive for much smaller athletes. For a defensive lineman with his frame, they were absurd. And those testing numbers show up on Sundays. Garrett explodes off the snap before offensive tackles can fully settle into their pass sets. His first step forces blockers to react immediately, and once they open their hips to protect the outside, he can counter inside. If they sit too far inside, his speed can threaten the edge. If they wait for him, his power becomes the problem. Then there is the length. Garrett's long arms allow him to make first contact before many tackles can get their hands properly positioned. He can create separation, control leverage, and keep blockers from getting comfortably into his chest. That combination of speed, strength, flexibility, and reach is why even technically sound offensive linemen can suddenly look unprepared against him. The frightening part is that NFL offenses know all of this. They study the film, they build protections around him, they assign tight ends to chip him, they slide offensive lines in his direction. Sometimes they send 2 blockers, sometimes even more, and Garrett still finds a way through. According to the source material, he averaged roughly 1 sack every 19 snaps during the 2025 season, while repeatedly seeing double teams and occasional triple teams. That is not just dominance, that is forcing an offense to spend multiple players solving one problem and still watching the problem arrive in the backfield. Once you understand the physical foundation, The next chapter becomes easier to believe, because in 2025, all that athletic ability turned into a season that pushed Garrett into record territory. The 2025 season that broke the scale. The 2025 season is where the Myles Garrett story moved from elite to historic. According to the source material, Garrett finished the year with 43 solo tackles, 17 assists, and 23 sacks across 17 games. He also earned another Pro Bowl selection and captured his second Defensive Player of the Year award. But the number everyone remembered was 23. For years, Michael Strahan's 22, 5 sacks had represented the mountain every pass rusher chased. TJ Watt later matched that total. Garrett did not match it. He moved past it, and the way he did it made the achievement even more dramatic. The source compares the number of snaps required to reach those totals. Strahan needed 567 snaps for 22. 5 sacks? Watt needed 616. Garrett, according to the script, reached 23 on only 437 snaps. That meant the pressure was not simply constant, it was brutally efficient. Week 18 against Cincinnati became the final test. Garrett entered the game with history within reach. But for 3 quarters, the record would not come. Cincinnati knew exactly what he wanted. The protection plan reflected it. Garrett later explained that he barely saw clean one-on-one opportunities on true drop back. Then, with just over 5 minutes remaining, the chance finally appeared. Garrett exploded off the snap, beat Orlando Brown Jr., and reached Joe Burrow for the sack that pushed him to 23. The record belonged to him. Afterward, Garrett described how difficult the game had been and how important it was to capitalize on the rare moment when Cincinnati left him with a favorable matchup. That detail tells you something important about his dominance. The entire offense knew what was coming. They knew where he was. They knew what record he was chasing. They built protection specifically to stop him, and he still got there. The season also included a career-high 33 tackles for loss according to the source material, reinforcing that Garrett was not merely hunting quarterback. He was disrupting entire offenses behind the line of scrimmage. But numbers alone do not explain fear. For that, you need to listen to the quarterbacks who actually had to survive him. And few players understand that experience better than Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow knows exactly what fear looks like. Joe Burrow has spent years seeing Myles Garrett across the line of scrimmage. That is enough experience to understand something casual viewers sometimes miss. The most dangerous defenders do not only affect the plays they make, they affect every play before it begins. According to the source material, Garrett recorded 17 career sacks against Cincinnati quarterbacks during his years with Cleveland, including 12, 5 against Burrow himself. No other player, the script states, had sacked Burrow more. That is not a small sample. That is years of game plans, film session, protection adjustments, and still the same defender finding a path to the quarterback. Burrow acknowledged the problem directly after Garrett's record-breaking performance. He explained that Garrett becomes the focus of Cincinnati's game plan every time they play because ignoring him is simply not an option. But there is a hidden cost to that kind of attention. Every extra blocker committed to Garrett is one less resource available somewhere else. If a tight end stays in to chip, he is not immediately releasing into a route. If the offensive line slides toward Garrett, another defender may get a more favorable matchup. If the quarterback has to speed up his internal clock because Garrett might win instantly, the entire passing offense changes. That is how one defensive player can control a game without recording a sack on every drive. Burrow also described Garrett as the kind of elite player an offense has to revolve its plan around, and the respect works both ways. Garrett, according to the source, has praised Burrow as one of the league's top quarterbacks whenever healthy. That mutual respect makes their rivalry more compelling. Garrett understands how dangerous Burrow can be. Burrow understands how quickly Garrett can destroy the timing of an offense. For years, those two forces collided inside the AFC North. And if Burrow represents the quarterback's perspective, another moment from the 2025 season revealed something even more dramatic. What happens when the offensive lineman assigned to stop Garrett realizes the battle is already lost? The answer became one of the most unforgettable microphone moments of the season. Jordan, run. The moment that said everything. Sometimes one sentence tells a story better than 100 statistics. During Cleveland's 2025 matchup against Green Bay, Myles Garrett beat offensive tackle Rasheed Walker so quickly that Walker did not have time to recover. He only had time to warn Jordan Love, Jordan, run. That was it. A professional NFL tackle, trained for years to protect a quarterback, had watched Garrett blow past him and realized the only remaining solution was escape. The moment went viral because it was funny on the surface. But underneath the humor was something much more revealing. Walker did not shout because Garrett was somewhere near the play. He shouted because the protection had already failed. Garrett had won the matchup so quickly that the next step belonged entirely to the quarterback. Love managed to scramble away and get rid of the football before Garrett could finish the play. But the damage to Green Bay's protection was already obvious, and the clip became a perfect explanation for why Garrett is so difficult to deal with. Offensive linemen normally live in a world of technique, footwork, hand placement, leverage, balance, recovery. Against Garrett, there are snaps where all of that disappears in less than a second. The defender wins so cleanly that the blocker moves from executing technique to sending an emergency warning. That kind of speed creates psychological pressure. Once an offensive tackle gets beaten badly by a move, he starts thinking about it on the next snap. Maybe he sets wider to protect against speed. Garrett can counter inside. Maybe he sits heavier against power. Garrett can threaten the edge. One loss creates the possibility of another because the blocker now has to defend against what just happened. That is how fear works at the NFL level. It is not players literally refusing to compete. It is elite professionals being forced to account for every possibility because one mistake against Garrett can immediately become a quarterback hit, sack, or broken play. But there is another chapter in Garrett's career that changed how people viewed his intensity. And unlike Jordan, nobody was laughing. The night everything went too far, November 14, 2019 remains one of the most controversial nights of Myles Garrett's career. Cleveland was facing Pittsburgh on Thursday Night Football. The Browns had the game under control, and only seconds remained. Then everything exploded. Garrett and Steelers quarterback Mason Rudolph became involved in a confrontation near the end of the game. The altercation escalated. Garrett pulled off Rudolph's helmet and then struck him on the head with it. The images went everywhere. This was no longer about sacks, power, or intimidation within the rules of football. The moment crossed a line, the NFL responded by suspending Garrett indefinitely, which ultimately cost him the final 6 regular season games and any potential playoff participation. According to the source material, Garrett also lost roughly $2 million in game checks. The incident immediately became part of his public identity. Former players condemned what happened. Analysts debated whether the punishment was enough. Fans who had admired Garrett's aggression suddenly saw the darker side of playing with too much emotion. Later, Garrett said Rudolph had directed a racial slur toward him during the confrontation. Rudolph repeatedly denied that allegation, and the NFL investigation said it found no evidence supporting the claim. That distinction matters. The allegation remained disputed, and the source does not establish it as fact. What is established is what millions of viewers saw. Garrett lost control in a moment that could have seriously injured another player. And that is where the larger lesson becomes important. Fear in football can be created legally through speed, strength, technique, and relentless pressure, but intimidation without discipline can become something else entirely. Garrett returned from the suspension and rebuilt his career into one defined primarily by elite performance. The incident did not stop him from becoming Defensive Player of the Year or from reaching record-setting sack totals, but it never completely disappeared either. It remains a reminder that the same emotional intensity that fuels greatness has to be controlled. Years later, Garrett's career would enter a very different kind of battle. This time, there were no helmets involved. The fight was about winning, leverage, and one enormous contract, $160 million worth of leverage. By early 2025, Myles Garrett had already given Cleveland years of elite production, but individual greatness was no longer enough. According to the source material, Garrett requested a trade on February 3, 2025 after another disappointing Browns season. His reason was straightforward. He wanted to win. His public statement made the priority clear. The goal, Garrett said, was never simply to build a career that ended in Canton. The goal was to compete for a Super Bowl. That changed the entire conversation. Cleveland was suddenly facing the possibility of losing the most valuable player on its defense, a franchise cornerstone still performing at an elite level. The Browns responded with money. A lot of it, according to the script. Garrett eventually agreed to a 4-year, $160 million extension on March 9, including $123, $5 million guaranteed, and an average annual salary of $40 million. At the time, the deal placed him at the top of the edge rusher market by average annual value. That kind of contract is not simply about rewarding past production. It is about leverage. Cleveland knew replacing Garrett would be nearly impossible. You can draft another defensive end, you can sign free agents, you can change a scheme, but players who force an entire offense to reorganize protection do not appear often. Garrett understood that, the Browns understood that, and the contract reflected it. Then Garrett added another layer to the story by producing the record-breaking 2025 season described in the source material. 23 sacks, another Defensive Player of the Year campaign, the kind of performance that made a $160 million commitment look less like desperation and more like the price of keeping an irreplaceable superstar. For a moment, Cleveland appeared to have solved the problem. Garrett wanted to compete. The Browns had paid him like the centerpiece of the future. The relationship seemed stabilized, but the source material then takes the story in a dramatic new direction, because only months later, another franchise reportedly arrived with an offer capable of changing the balance of power in the NFL, and suddenly, Myles Garrett was no longer Cleveland's problem to solve. He became the NFC West nightmare, the blockbuster that shocked the NFL. According to the source material, the NFL landscape changed on June 2. 2026. Myles Garrett was traded to the Los Angeles Rams. The reported return was massive. Jared Verse, a 2027 first-round pick, a 2028 second-round pick, and a 2029 third-round pick. Whether you looked at the names, the draft capital, or the player being acquired, the message was obvious. Los Angeles was not making a small upgrade. The Rams were going all in. The reaction around the league reflected how shocking the move appeared. Mac Jones, according to the source, initially thought a social media post announcing the deal might be fake or AI generated. The idea of Garrett joining an already dangerous Rams roster sounded too extreme to immediately believe. Then there was Trent Williams. One of the most accomplished offensive tackles in football did not need a long breakdown when asked about the trade. His reaction, according to the script, was essentially one word: it sucked. And from the perspective of an NFC West tackle, that reaction made perfect sense. Garrett was no longer an AFC North problem. Now San Francisco, Arizona, and Seattle would have to prepare for him twice a year. That changes preparation across an entire division. The Rams already had a roster. The source described as being close to Super Bowl contention. Adding Garrett meant opponents could no longer focus protection on only one dangerous pass rusher. Every protection decision now risks creating a favorable matchup somewhere else. That is what separates superstar acquisitions from ordinary roster moves. A normal trade adds talent. A player like Garrett can change the geometry of an offense. Quarterbacks may need to release the ball faster. Coordinators may need to alter route concepts. Running backs may be asked to help in protection. Tight ends may chip before entering routes, and offensive tackles may spend the entire week studying one player's first step. For Garrett, the move also connected directly to the goal he had publicly emphasized: a Super Bowl. Records were already on the resume. Awards were already there. Money was already there. The next challenge was winning at the highest level. And according to the source, the rest of the NFC West understood immediately that Garrett's arrival changed their problem too. Now an entire division has a problem. The most revealing reactions to Myles Garrett's arrival in the NFC West were not about hype. They were about protection. Arizona Cardinals tight end Trey McBride, according to the source material, spoke about the need to think constantly about doubling Garrett, chipping him, and finding ways to prevent one defender from destroying the offensive structure. That is the real impact of an elite edge rusher. Before the quarterback checks the coverage, someone has to locate Garrett. Before the offensive line finalizes its protection, someone has to know where Garrett is aligned. Before the tight end releases into a route, he may need to hit Garrett first. The entire offense starts with one question: where is number 95? And the Rams, according to the source material, would not be asking Garrett to create pressure alone. Byron Young was coming off a productive season of his own, and the defensive front around Garrett meant opponents could not simply throw every available blocker at one man without consequences somewhere else. That creates the nightmare scenario: double Garrett, and another pass rusher gets a favorable matchup. Leave Garrett one-on-one, and the quarterback may not have time to finish his drop. Chip him with a tight end, and the passing concept loses speed. Roll the pocket away from him, and the defense knows where the quarterback is trying to escape. Every solution creates another problem. But there is another part of Garrett's story that explains why physical punishment alone has rarely slowed him for long. In September 2022, Garrett was involved in a serious car crash after leaving Browns practice. According to the source, His Porsche lost control on a wet road, flipped multiple times, and left both Garrett and a passenger needing medical attention. Garrett suffered shoulder and biceps injuries, cuts, bruises, and other non-life-threatening injuries. The scene looked frightening, yet within days, Garrett was back around the Browns facility, and he returned to football soon afterward. That episode does not make him invincible. No athlete is, but it does reveal something about the durability and mentality that have defined his career. Garrett has already experienced record seasons, controversy, punishment, enormous contracts, physical setback, trade drama, and constant double teams. And according to the source material, he still measures success by the one thing he has not yet secured: a Super Bowl. That means the most dangerous version of Myles Garrett may not be the player chasing another sack record. It may be the player who believes everything he has accomplished so far was only preparation for what comes next. What really makes Myles Garrett terrifying, after all the sacks, records, viral moments, controversy, money, and fear, the most intimidating thing about Myles Garrett may not be his 2'7", 2-pound frame or explosive first step. It may be the standard inside his own head. According to the source material, Garrett once made his ambition unmistakable. He did not want the next generation to simply produce another Myles Garrett. He wanted his career to become so distinctive that comparisons would feel almost impossible. That mindset explains why individual accomplishments have never appeared sufficient for him. The awards are already there. The Pro Bowls are already there. The All-Pro recognition is already there. And according to the story we have followed, the record-breaking sack season is there too. But Garrett has repeatedly emphasized something bigger: winning. That is why his earlier trade request mattered. His message was essentially that the journey was never supposed to end with personal recognition or a path from Cleveland to Canton. The destination he wanted was a Super Bowl. That distinction reveals an important lesson about greatness. Individual dominance can make opponents fear you. Records can make history remember you. Money can prove how valuable an organization believes you are. But championships demand something different. They require discipline, trust, preparation, leadership, and the ability to perform when individual glory becomes secondary to the team. Garrett's career also provides another lesson. Intensity is powerful only when it remains controlled. The Mason Rudolph incident showed what can happen when emotion crosses the boundary of competition. Whatever frustration surrounded that confrontation, striking another player with a helmet was unacceptable. And the suspension that followed became part of Garrett's story. Greatness does not mean pretending mistakes never happened. It means learning from them and ensuring that competitive fire is directed toward performance rather than harmful actions. That is where the human side of this story matters. Football is violent by nature, but respect must survive the violent. Rivalries can be fierce without becoming personal hatred. Players can dominate opponents without dehumanizing them. And the strongest competitors are often the ones capable of walking away when emotions threaten to take control. Now, Garrett's ultimate challenge, as framed by our source material, is no longer proving that he can terrorize quarterback. Everybody already knows that. The challenge is converting individual dominance into the accomplishment he values most: a championship. Because when his career finally ends, people will remember the impossible athleticism. They will remember quarterbacks scrambling away. They will remember offensive lines sending extra blockers toward number 95. They will remember the record, controversies, and moments that made Garrett one of football's most fascinating defenders. But Garrett appears to want one final image above all the others, standing on football's biggest stage with a Super Bowl championship. And if that happens, the story will no longer simply be about why NFL players feared Myles Garrett. It will be about how one of the most physically gifted defenders of his generation turned fear, failure, pressure, and ambition into the legacy he had been chasing all along. Now it's your turn. If you believe Myles Garrett can finish this story with a Super Bowl championship, come on. If you think another obstacle will stand in his way, comment too and tell us what it is. Keep the debate respectful, and let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoyed this story, hit the like button, share it with another NFL fan, and subscribe to the channel for more NFL news, rivalries, trades, player stories, and behind-the-scenes drama.